inside the 5. It's a touchdown. It's a touchdown.
It's the Redskins at 1.
The Redskins at 1.
The biggest skin stories every day at 1. 2, 3,
The Redskins at 1 on the Sports Fix.
Touchdown.
Now, here's Kevin Sheehan and Thom Loverro.
Redskins at 1, brought to you by Farish Chrysler Dodge Jeep in the heart of Fairfax. J.I. Halsell joins us actually live in studio. You and I have talked so many times, going back a couple of years now. J.I., of course, worked with the Redskins in their salary cap area and worked for the league for a while, and he's really helped us over the last couple of years figure out salary cap issues, figure out what the Redskins can do, what they can't do. Before we get to the Redskins, what's your best guess right now on where we are with the new CBA and whether or not it's going to get done within a reasonable amount of time?
I think with the CBA situation, everybody's looking for these big meetings, owners and the union to get together at a hotel, at some resort in a ballroom. And, a lot of those conversations actually don't occur in that setting. It's a lot of behind the scenes, phone calls, side conversations. Do I think there's been substantial movement in the negotiation? I don't think so at this point. I think it's something that'll get done. If it does get done before the end of the league year, it gets done at the 11th hour.
And the end of the league year for everybody is March 3rd, right?
Right, March 3rd. So that's the drop dead date. And, if we don't have a deal by March 3rd, then we don't have a collective bargaining agreement. We don't have a 2011 league year. And, if there is a quote-unquote lockout, maybe it is for that month of March until they hammer out the details of a new deal.
You see, this is what I'm trying to figure out. I covered the baseball strike. And actually, the baseball strike was different in '94 because ultimately a court decision wound up forcing them to go back. But a lot of times these things don't get hammered out until there's the pressure cooker of a deadline. That's when they lock themselves in a room and start giving and taking on stuff. But I'm not sure where the real deadline is. You mentioned like March
3rd.
But nobody's going to really be that impacted initially by then. Is a real deadline training camp? Is it as far as the beginning of what the 2011 season would be?
I don't think there's a definitive date, beyond that March 3rd date. But I think as you start getting into the summer and, you're going to have a draft regardless. But once you start getting into missed OTAs, missed opportunities to, even have training camp, that's when the pressure starts to mount. So if you start getting into that May-June timeframe and you don't have a new collective bargaining agreement, that's when people probably honestly should start kind of panicking about whether or not we're going to have a 2011 season.
That's when the coaches start saying to the owner, hey, I need my guys in camp.
Right.
You want to win, we need to get here now.
Right. Do you think it's impossible for it to get to training camp, get to August, they don't have an agreement, and they put one together? Remember, the 82 strike and the 87 strike were all they came together. Well, the 82 strike, you played 2 games, and then they got locked out until there was an agreement, and they started playing again. But with that situation, there was a training camp, and in 87, same thing, is you played part of the season before you went to the replacement players. Do you think that it could be put together in August and you have a season that starts in September with a 2-week training camp?
While I think that's unlikely, I wouldn't say that it's impossible. Even looking back at the 2006 CBA negotiation, that was something that came together very quickly at the very last minute between the late Gene Upshaw and Commissioner Tagliabue.
Right.
So, there's a certain precedent there that, these two parties now, granted, the principal negotiators are different this go around, but it's something that potentially could come together very quickly at the last minute.
J.I., because there's so much discussion about the 18 games, about the money that the owners want back, about the players saying, listen, we'll keep the same deal as is. Try to net it out in terms of what are the 2 to 3 or 4 big issues that are unresolved that need to get resolved for us to have football in September.
Revenue and the 18-game season, because they're actually directly related to each other.
Right.
Because if you play 18 games, then you have more revenue, which is at the end of the day what the owners are looking for, and you can keep however you split the pie up, you can keep that the same as is today. But
and it's split up currently how?
It's just under 60%
of the gross that the players get
of football revenues. Yeah,
right.
go to player costs. But if you have a bigger pie, then you can keep that same 60%. Now, if you keep the pie the same, meaning you continue to have 16 games, well, then that's when the owners are going to say, well, look, we need that 60% to come down. So that's where the give and take is.
And explain for everybody why now the owners want to pay the players on a 16-game schedule, assume it's 16 games for a moment, less than they've been paying them. Because the perception from most of the fans is the NFL's stronger than it's ever been. You see the television contracts and the billions of dollars. Why do the owners want some of that back?
From the owner's perspective, from a short-term perspective, yeah, they're going to claim that their margins aren't where they need to be.
And again, and let me interrupt you for 1 second. For those that aren't following, their profit margins, not the revenues, the gross revenue that comes in, but their costs are much higher than they used to be, and therefore they actually make less money,
right,
or they claim they are, than they were before.
Right, and that goes to the next point, to the kind of the long-term perspective and the growth of the game, and they feel that under the current economic model, their expenses are going to continue to increase and they're going to outpace their revenues, whereby their margins are then going to decrease, and it then negatively impacts the growth of the game.
It's a reasonable thing to understand, right, for most people.
It is, but I think the challenge is the fact that ownership won't open up their books. So, you can claim that, the margins aren't where they need to be, but you don't have the supporting evidence that the union is looking for to, bring some truth to that claim.
Well, let's pretend there's going to be a season and a Redskins season then.
Before, just one more thing on this, because I know we want to get to J.I.'s sort of big picture on how the Redskins will handle the offseason. On the 18 games, you say revenue, and really what it comes down to is the owners want to see their profit margins where they used to be, essentially. And they're claiming that they're not there anymore. And then the 18 games, how do you to me, the consumer probably, even though a lot of people think 18 games is too many, and they talk about the injuries that'll happen and will be on on a third-string quarterback, the preseason is a terrible product in the NFL, and 4 games are too many, and 2 games eliminated there and put into the regular season makes economic sense for the owners. What is the likelihood that they'll get that from the players?
It's going to have to be, they're going to have to concede something to the players in exchange for that 18.
What would be the obvious concession?
It's going to have to probably be something as it relates to health and player safety. I think there are practical concessions that I think both parties would agree to, such as,
increased
larger
roster sizes,
roster limits. Exactly. There's going to have to be some sort of agreement on existing contracts. How do you account for 2 additional games when you've, executed these deals under the assumption of paying a guy for
dividing
16?
it by 16.
Yeah, and
yep.
So now how do you add these 2 additional games? Do you grandfather deals, so on and so forth? But I think at the end of the day, the biggest issue is if you're going to have these players play 2 additional games, how do you ensure their long-term health and safety?
Where do you think it ends up? Give us your prediction right now on January 27th.
I'm an optimist. I think a deal gets done. Do I think it gets necessarily done by March 3rd? Not necessarily, but do I think a deal can get done in the month of March? Absolutely.
Is it a deal that ends up with an 18-game regular season?
I think more than likely.
Yeah, I think so too. So if there is an agreement, things do move forward. What are the Redskins? Are the Redskins better off, better prepared to take advantage of what's going to be a very interesting and kind of like Wild West type of personnel field in the free agent market? Are they better positioned than they have been in some time?
Absolutely. And Kevin and Thom, you guys have talked about this over the course of the year. They've definitely, from a salary cap, money management perspective, done a great job of just clearing up cap space for a potential cap in 2011. And so with that space, it doesn't mean that they have to use all of that space, but at the end of the day, they've given themselves significant flexibility. And that's really all you could ask for, because now you can pursue what looks to be a super duper free agent class. But if you don't want to go out and spend a ton of money on a UFA, you can use that to, re-up or extend some of your young guys, like a LaRon Landry as an example. So they've given themselves significant flexibility, and that's a position they haven't been in historically.
Payroll flexibility in any sport is one of the things you want to strive for.
And they've never had it. And J.I. and I and you have talked about this on the air and off of it. even though they've always found a way, you and Eric Schaefer and the group out there have always found a way to restructure contracts to get under the cap, there was always so much invested in so few that you never had other money for more quality players. And now they've got that flexibility. At least they've got a clean slate. How they handle that, we'll find out. But they've got a clean slate for the first time.
Right. They absolutely do. And because you have that flexibility, it also impacts the way you structure contracts. When you're up against the cap, like the Redskins historically have been, that's why you see such, bad structured contracts, and not to say Albert Haynesworth deal was poorly structured, but those types of deals where now with that flexibility, you can keep a lot of that money in 1 year so that it doesn't go out into future years and impacts you out in the future if that player doesn't work out.
What's your gut right now on the brain trust that is Mike Shanahan and Bruce Allen as to how they will handle the biggest free agent class in NFL history, if we get to that? And we're as a group here, we're assuming that your optimism comes true and there's an agreement and there's a normal free agency period prior to a draft, et cetera, et cetera. Will they be aggressive? Will they take what sort of personality, free agency personality, do you think they'll have?
Well, if you just look at the track record of Coach Shanahan and even Bruce in Tampa Bay and Oakland, they've leaned more towards veteran players. So, will they pursue some UFAs out on the market? Absolutely. But now at what positions? That'll be kind of interesting to see because, out on the UFA market, it's a lot that the market for a unrestricted free agent interior offensive lineman is significantly cheaper than going out to try to get a wide receiver or a cornerback or somewhere like that. So maybe that's where they decide to go get a veteran player on the unrestricted free agent market. And then those more high price positions, wide receiver, corner, maybe you address that in the draft where you get a guy for cheap.
So their strategy in the draft will also be but the draft, okay, bear with me here on this. If they reach an agreement, the free agency will come before the draft.
Unfortunately, it'd be interesting if we lived in an NFL world where the draft came before free agency.
That would be interesting.
And it would really work in their favor this year if free agency followed the draft.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The quarterback situation obviously is the most obvious when we talk about this team's needs in the offseason. Everybody seems to think that they're going to take a quarterback at number 10. Do you think they will?
I'm not 100% believer in that line of thought. I haven't seen Blaine Gabbert on film. I'm not a scout, but I don't know if there's a quarterback who you can feel is going to be an impactful player, which that player needs to be at number 10. If a linebacker like Von Miller's there at number 10, or
from Texas A&M,
if Cameron Jordan continues to play well and do well in this process leading up to the draft, perhaps you take an impact player on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm not exactly sold on the thought that they're going to go take a quarterback at number 10.
We've talked about this, you and I have, Tom and I have, about how the draft over the last, maybe 5 to 10 years, the way the draft was conceived was the worst teams would have the best chance of getting the best players. But because of the enormous investment required for a Matthew Stafford at 1 overall, as an example, that it's actually almost a disadvantage to be in the top 5 to 10 in the draft. And that's why we've seen so few trades over the last few years, because nobody wants to trade up anymore because it's too big of a risk. But at 10, is there more of an opportunity at 10 to trade down?
Yeah, if you just look at it from a pure financial perspective, at that 10 spot, the money is reasonable for the type of talent that you can get at that spot. And so, yeah, if a team is looking to go to 10 because a player that they're interested in is there and they don't feel like that player is going to be there at 17 or wherever, then, that is a spot you can trade down from. Whereas last year, the spot they were in, that's a spot that would have been really, really difficult for them to trade out of.
But a lot has to go right. I mean, a lot of that has to be maybe last-minute things that happen on draft day to go right for a team to decide, wow, the guy we want is still on the board, and maybe we can make a deal with the Redskins to get that 10th pick.
Yeah, it would have this. It would really have to be a result of kind of how the draft board plays out in those first kind of 7 to 8 picks.
Yeah. At Salary Cap 101 on Twitter for J.I. He's going to join us over the next few weeks, once a week, something like that. And we're going to go position by position because you've done a really good job of looking at the need areas for the Redskins and what's out there in free agency specifically. And you just mentioned something today that I don't think we've talked a lot about, and that is that the investment in free agency for, say, offensive linemen would be a lot less than it would be for receiver, and maybe that's where they'll end up going. We do this thing on Wednesdays where we make bold predictions. You heard it here first. And I said yesterday that Jacoby Jones, the wide receiver out of Houston, is an unrestricted free agent. He played for Kyle. He's big. I like him a lot, and I thought that seems like that might be the obvious, guy for the Redskins. And he's not going to be a Larry Fitzgerald price.
He's not going to cost you a ton of money. He knows the offense. He's got an abundance of physical talent. I think he'd be a good fit. And, I don't necessarily think, assuming they re-sign Santana Moss, Anthony Armstrong.
You think they will too, right?
I think that they will. But Santana Moss, Anthony Armstrong, and a third receiver, and that receiver doesn't have to be a 1,300-yard receiver, but if that guy can be a 700-800-yard receiver coupled with continued production from Moss and Armstrong, you've got yourself a really good pass receiving core, inclusive of Chris Cooley.
Especially given that he's got a little bit of size to him.
Absolutely.
We all know that Santana's listed 5'10", 5'11", but he's really not. Yeah. You think they will re-sign Moss?
I do.
And I think you and I have talked about this before, but I think they like Malcolm Kelly. Don't you have the same sense too?
I do, and I was at the organization when Malcolm was drafted. He's a great kid. Hard worker. It's just unfortunately he hasn't been able to stay healthy.
He can't keep his wheels.
But that was the big question mark on him coming out of Oklahoma.
But he is a good kid.
All right, you're going to join us next week during Super Bowl week for a Redskins at One segment, and we'll take one position, look at it in terms of free agency and what's out there and what might make sense for the Redskins. And we'll do that once a week for the next few weeks.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks so much. Again, at Salary Cap 101, J.I.'s really good at following the league and really understanding the Redskins' needs and how it all works fiscally within a cap, which we're going to end up having, just a matter of when. Thanks, J.I. very much.